Um, to welcome everybody to our Provoke Media webinar. Thank you so much for the overwhelming response to this session. We've never done one of these before, and now I'm wishing that we'd done it years ago. We have a little over 200 people registered for this webinar. We have about 120 in the room right now. I'm going to give it about another minute and just keep talking like this until it seems like we've topped out. But we are delighted to have so many of you here, eager to find out what makes a winning campaign in the SABRE Awards. Joining me here is my colleague, Maja Pawinska-Sims. Maja has two roles in this presentation. The first is that she is an editor here at PRovoke Media and has been involved in the SABRE Awards for pretty much the last decade in that capacity. But Maja is also a former SABRE Awards winner. She has entered a number of SABRE Awards in her previous life as a PR person at Weber Shandwick and elsewhere, and therefore knows how to win from both the judging side of the equation and the entrant side of the equation. And she's going to be sharing her insights along with me as we go through this presentation. Maja, why don't I hand this off to you?
Thank you very much, Paul. Welcome, everybody. We've been meaning to do this for some time, and I'm delighted that we've both finally got round to it. Paul's obviously came up with the idea for the SABRE Awards, and will outline kind of his vision and why they matter in a second. And I've been writing award entries before I came back to journalism 7 years ago for 17 years. That's kind of what I did. So and won a fair few. So I think between us, we've got a pretty good set of tips and guidelines for you and what you need to do and think about as you're preparing your SABRE entries as the deadlines start approaching this month and in January to give you the very best chance of success. So without further ado, we've kind of outlined what we're doing. Between us, we've seen written, discarded hundreds and thousands of entries. So we do see an awful lot of entries come past us and put together really great SABRE juries in each region, which Paul chairs as well. So we've got a really good overview of what judges are looking for, which we'll go into a bit later. So basically in this webinar, Paul's going to outline what makes the SABRE Awards special in a second. Then we're going to look at what we're looking for in a winner, the entries that we want to highlight as the best campaigns in the world and across all three regions that we cover, plus the African SABREs, how to structure right and present a great entry and your options there, how the judging process works for the SABREs and what our judges think. And then at the end, we're going to have time for Q&A. So if you want to pop your questions in the chat as we go along, we'll get through as many as we can of those at the end. And then anything that we don't have time to answer or can't answer at the moment, where we'll follow up after this for everyone who registered with a copy of the deck, my background notes for every section, and we'll put together an FAQ as well based on the questions we get asked today. So there's quite a lot to cover. First of all, Paul Holmes, what are the SABREs and what were you thinking when you came up with these?
Okay, so when I started writing about public relations, which is about 175 years ago, one of the things that I came across all the time was public relations people who would tell me, nobody really understands what I do for a living. Nobody thinks that this is a real job with real responsibilities. Everybody thinks it's just like advertising. Even my mom and dad don't understand what I really do. And I thought, one of the things that is missing in our business is the kind of recognition that is commonplace in advertising. And
Mm.
so I wanted to create something, and this is a very simple idea, and I'm not claiming that I'm the only person who ever came up with it, obviously. I wanted to create something that celebrated the absolute best of what public relations is. And I wanted to create something that did that across all of the disciplines that are part of our profession. So consumer marketing, sure, that's a big one. Public affairs, financial communications, community relations, corporate social responsibility, everything that we do. And what we found was that PR people were both keen on seeing how their work stacked up against their competitors. There's a benchmarking element to this. Are we really as good and as smart as we think we are? They wanted to build the brand of their agency, both with potential employees, because everybody wants to work at a creative, winning environment, but also with clients who want ways to differentiate the great agencies from the merely good agencies. And they wanted to be able to market their agencies more effectively in their local markets. And particularly as we've spread into Europe and Asia and Africa and Latin America, we found that for firms in smaller and emerging markets, that's even more powerful. If you're a 10-person agency in Slovenia and you can say, we won an award in competition with Weber Shandwick, Edelman, Burson, Ketchum, all of those big brands. That's an incredibly powerful message to potential clients that you are just as smart and just as strategic and just as creative and just as effective as any of the global powerhouses. And the fact of the matter is that, our awards go to big agencies, small agencies, mid-size agencies. We have found over the years that there's no correlation at all between size and creativity, or size and intelligence. There are great, smart PR programs coming from everywhere. And we love celebrating that. We love the fact that this work is inspirational, both to the teams that do it and the people who read it.
Okay, perfect. And it's not just if you pick up a trophy, that's not over on the night, is it? It goes up to our global awards
Oh
too.
no, absolutely. We now have regional competitions in every continent. The regional competitions are hugely competitive. It varies somewhat, but across all of the competitions we do, the average number of entries per category is somewhere between 40 and 50. That means that if you make it to the short list, which is usually 5 campaigns, you are one of the top 10%. If you make it to win a SABRE, you are one of the top 2%. And then we take the top from among those winning campaigns and recognize them at our global event in Washington, D.C. at the end of the year. And those are a fraction of 1%. They are almost literally 1 in 5,000, or 4 in 5,000, let's say, of the campaigns that we see over the course of the year. So those really are the best of the best. And
Yeah.
look, there are a lot of award competitions out there. And it's not all about being the biggest. But globally, we see more entries than any other public relations awards competition. That's one of the things that makes SABRE special. We have a platform in PRovoke Media and our website and our content that is respected in and of itself, but we also have judges who are picked from among industry leaders in every region, in every country. We strive for geographic balance, we strive for diversity, and we also strive for a mix of agency and client side judges. Our judges are respected industry leaders. And so when these campaigns are recognized with certificates or trophies, they have been thoroughly peer reviewed. They have been examined from every angle and they have been selected as the absolute best. And I think that's what sets SABRE apart from what is now a fairly wide and diverse range of awards competitions for PR work.
Yeah, there are a lot of award schemes out there, and I think it's yeah, that the seniority of the juries we pick from around the world is definitely one of the things that, you're impressing some of the best comms leaders on the planet if you get through to our shortlists, basically, which I know everyone really values.
Yeah. And
Um,
I always talk about the marketing advantage of this in terms of you can go to market and say, we want a SABRE and some people will hire you. But of course, we both, I think, have come across people who've said, we got a client because somebody was on the jury and saw our work and called us up directly and said, I loved your campaigns. We want to work with you.
yeah,
So
that definitely
even
happened.
even then the process pays off.
Absolutely.
I mean, look, I would say this obviously, and I may be biased, but I think that entering the SABRE Awards is one of the best investments in terms of marketing that's available to any agency.
It's worth noting that some of the agencies of all sizes, in fact, who prioritize SABRE as part of their marketing budgets tend to be the ones who are having the most success in other areas of their business as well. It's often seen as a core part of marketing strategy, and it definitely pays off. So dates and deadlines. Actually, funnily enough, tomorrow is the early bird deadline for the EMEA SABRE Awards, but you have until 17th of January to actually enter the EMEA scheme shortlisting.
Actually, I
Are we going
have
to extend
asked,
that?
I've asked our tech people to keep the early deadline open for another week in EMEA because it seemed a little unfair to give people lots of advice today and expect them to turn campaigns around tomorrow. So if you're on this call and are planning to enter the EMEA Sabres, you can have an extra week before the prices go up and the early bird deadline is no longer available. So you'll have until I think it's the 20th next week in order to get your work in at the lowest price.
Perfect. And then it's done before Christmas. So that's always nice. Shortlisted, we'll be shortlisting end of February, when we get through all our jury sessions in the spring. And then our SABRE Awards are going to be held on April the 2nd in London next year. Africa's got slightly later deadlines. The early deadline for Africa and North America is already the 20th of December, and the final deadline for those two is the 27th of January next year, with shortlisting in March and events being held in May. So I do want to say a note on timing, though. Don't underestimate how long it takes to put together an entry. You're going to not be able to do this in 40 minutes. So do give yourselves enough time to get through it, to get client sign off, to do all your revisions, and to make sure you have time to upload supporting materials and all that kind of stuff. So please don't feel this is something you need to rush. It's better to just take the time. Next, what do we care about, Paul? There's lots of things we care about in our awards, and you kind of went through, you touched on a couple of them in your original vision for what the SABRE Awards was going to be. I think the top one here, bold and brave. We talk a lot about courage, don't we? And encouraging clients to be braver as well. Do you want to talk a bit about some of these areas and what we really care about when we look at the body of work that makes up SABRE campaign award winners?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that makes this process challenging, both for award entrants and for us when we get to evaluate it, is that public relations is such a broad discipline. And there are some things that stand out in the consumer marketing realm, for example, that don't necessarily apply in public affairs or crisis management or issues management. And so one of the things that we've avoided is any kind of template that says you'll get 10 points for strategy and planning, and 10 points for research, and 10 points for creativity, and 10 points for results, or anything like that. This is much more about looking at campaigns in their totality. And it's much more about, in some cases, the feelings that they inspire. I will say that not every campaign that wins is necessarily bold and brave, but the campaigns that our judges love tend to have an element of risk. Um, I can remember a number of campaigns where the judges have said, I can't believe that the agency was brave enough to pitch that to the client. And where they've also said, I can't believe the client was bold enough to accept that idea. And all of those campaigns have ended up winning big. Our judges really admire a degree of risk taking. But at the same time, the other things on here are almost table stakes. You have to be authentic and you have to be ethical. Judges are very cautious about work that they consider to be somewhere on an ethical fringe, right? They want to show public relations as a profession that does good and does it in a way that is ethical and honest and at the highest standards. Engaging and inclusive, yes, we want work that starts conversations. We want work that provokes debate. And we want work that is not exclusionary, that doesn't, that appeals to the widest audience possible. Creative and innovative, this is where a lot of other awards competitions begin and end. It is a key key component of a winning SABRE campaign. We're looking for ideas that, and our definition of creativity, by the way, is not just something that's big and explosive and grabs the attention. A lot of it is creativity, to me, is elegant problem solving. It's coming up with the strategically appropriate solution to whatever your client's problem was. If that solution is innovative, if it's different and new, even better. And then shareable and sticky. In today's environment, getting a story into a traditional media outlet is very rarely enough. We are also looking for, did it start a conversation? Was there then engagement around it? Did it have shelf life, or was it, we're not looking for something that appears and then disappears within a matter of days. We're looking for something that has staying power and really builds brands, reputations, relationships over time. And then that last point that you have on there, Maja, is critical. And I know we're going to discuss what results look like in a little more depth later. But we want evidence that it worked. And working for our judges is not just we got a lot of media coverage. It is that media coverage really impacted the target audience. Ideally, it changed behavior, but at the very least, we need to show that people were engaged with the topic, with the brand, with the cause, that this made a difference in how people behave.
Yeah, we will talk a lot more about the what we like to see in terms of objectives and results later on. But there are some things, and Paul, you touched on this a little bit, things we are not at all bothered about, agency size being one of them.
Yeah. One of the things, we'll talk a bit about entry format in a minute as well. One of the things that we have tried very much not to be is exclusive. There are some awards competitions where we know that the price of putting together the entry can be tens of thousands of dollars. That video is a video presentation is a part of it. That the packaging is important. My first instruction to judges is that we are judging the campaign, not the entry. We are judging the work, not the presentation. And that's a key ingredient in this, because it levels the playing field. I said this earlier, you can be a 10-person agency in Lithuania and your work will be considered just as seriously as if you were one of the top 5 global agencies competing everywhere. And our winners every year are a wide range of local firms, mid-sized firms with a creative reputation, large agencies that do good work, but that is simply not a factor. Household name and blue chip clients, big budgets. We have judges who will, in fact, say, we want to reward a smaller campaign because they got so much more bang for every dollar they spent. We also have judges who like to reward clients who spend a lot of money on public relations. I think we can all agree that it would be great if clients spent millions of dollars on public relations all the time. But that is never the decisive factor. The decisive factor is the creative idea, it's the execution, it's the impact. It's not how much money the client had to spend.
Perfect, thank you. Let's just move on to a bit more about several sections on what makes a great entry. So we're going to talk a bit more about presentation of your entry and format. Then we're going to talk about our categories, because there are lots of them in the SABRE Awards. Then I'm going to dive into a bit about the storytelling and how to write your entry. And that will include looking more closely at what we like to see in terms of objectives and results. So first of all, terms of presentation, Paul said, we're not like other award schemes in that we don't have really, really rigid criteria and word counts and points allocated to each section, because each part of the public relations industry has a completely different set of criteria. And some campaigns we really want to look at the data and analytics and insights. Others we want to look at whether it shifted policy expectations. Others we want a great big creative idea, depending entirely on what the client brief was and what the agency did that was outstanding. There's 3 top formats that come through really strongly in our entries. These are the ones that are most popular. Now, I'm not very good at PowerPoint. I'm just saying out there. So I'm going to try now to share with you an example of our top 3 formats. The first is a 2-page Word document. So this is really straightforward. This is a really straightforward piece of work. This is literally a 2-page written entry here. It's just Word. It's very simply formatted. There's no images on it, although we'll talk about supporting materials later, because we do like to see some visuals that bring the campaign to life. This one best in show, despite being laid out in the most simple and straightforward way possible. So you don't have to throw all the bells and whistles at it.
I should say that I always think of this approach to award entries as SABRE classic. So when we started the competition all those years ago, every other award competition that existed had a very specific format, and it was this: 2 pages of type. And visuals were discouraged. The sort of even branding it with your agency name was discouraged. And this was a sort of simple and rather pure approach to award entries. And I would say that in the first decade of the SABRE Awards, every entry looked like this. It is one of the things that I always advise entrants to remember is that our judges are looking at about 80 campaigns in total, usually across 2 or 3 categories. Can be anywhere between 80 and 100 campaigns. And 80 or 100 campaigns that all look like this can get very boring and hard to read. And so breaking it up with something a little more entertaining is often helpful. But at the end of the day, our judges care more about substance than they do about style. And if you have a great story and you tell it in this format, it can still win. And as Maja said, this did in fact win Best in Show at our global Sabres. So while I don't recommend this format to everyone, it certainly won't make you a loser.
Okay. The second one I want to show you. This is the polar opposite approach. So this is a great campaign, the Dove Black Harris professional campaign, which Ogilvy has showcased at our MEA Summit actually last year as well. This is an incredible campaign. So this is completely designed, 7-page PowerPoint with a different page of the PDF for each section that they've decided they want to put in this. So it's got an overview, research and insights, a strategy document, a bit about the execution, and then moving on to the results, all in nice summary, beautifully presented. It's got loads of data in there and it looks gorgeous. This was also has won multiple awards. Paul, what do you want to say about this type of presentation and format?
So there are a couple of things about this that really stand out to me. The first is that it's clearly branded by the agency. All of the agency's submissions last year looked like this. So the same format, the same background for the entry. I think that branding your work like this is smart. The judges will remember it. If they like your work, they will pay attention because they know that it's going to be of decent quality. It is exceptionally clear in terms of layout. You can go to the objectives, you can go to the results, you can go to the strategy at the click of a button. The only thing that I'd say about this is that judges who are used to what I guess I'd call the 2-page rule might get a little impatient by the time they get to page 6 or 7. Again, it's very unlikely that that you will lose simply because you did 7, 8, even 10 pages of PowerPoint. But as a rule, I think it's probably best not to test the patience of the judges. So if you're going to do this, you need to be absolutely confident in your storytelling ability. Yeah. And that word storytelling is going to come up again and again, I think, as we go forward.
The third format, you'll all be familiar with London-based agency Hope and Glory, which nearly broke Frankfurt Airport a couple of years ago because they won so many Sabres. Their entries are kind of a masterclass in how to kind of mix both written storytelling, visuals, and keep it simple. So this is our 2-page Hope and Glory entry for the IKEA and Shelter room sets campaign. Brilliant campaign that won loads of stuff last year, all over the place. We've got a selection of images just to bring it to life. Brief overview, objective, strategy, idea, the activity, and the results, clearly labeled with budget and commercial impact at the end. And with every section just incredibly well written, short, sweet, succinct, and absolutely no jargon in there whatsoever. Paul, what do we love about these campaigns?
Okay, so this for me is the ideal format for a SABRE entry. There is enough of a visual component that it both captures your attention and the pictures tell a story about what the campaign looked like and felt like. Um, the opening section on In Brief is great. Those of you who have been journalists will have heard this 100 times. Those of you in PR have probably heard it 50 times. Um, the storytelling idea that you tell people what you're going to tell them, then you tell them, and then you tell them what you told them. This is almost perfect in that regard. This in brief section at the beginning is a summary that tells judges in advance what they're going to love about this campaign. Then we go very clearly through objectives. What did the clients want? Strategy. How did we decide to approach the problem? Idea. What was the key insight? And our judges are much more interested in insights today than they were a few years ago. That can come from research or it can just come from, within the agency, but we like where the idea comes from. The activity, so a couple of columns there explaining what we did, and a couple of columns on what we did is enough. We used to see entries which were all about this. These are all the things we did. It's important to have that section, but it has to be surrounded by all the rest of the stuff here, the brief, the insight, and then at the end, the results. The results are exceptionally clear. First of all, there's a press impact. How much coverage did we get? Then there's the charity and policy and commercial impact. What did that mean for our clients? What did that mean in the public affairs environment? And most of all, what did it mean in terms of the business? There is one thing I want to draw everybody's attention to here because it is a question that comes up all the time, and that is the total budget. So we do not require budget. We know that there are lots of clients out there who don't want you to tell us or anybody else how much they spent on public relations or on a particular campaign. We know that that information is confidential. And you can leave budget information out entirely. You can put in budget information in and mark it as confidential, and that will be respected. Or you can include the budget information. And the only thing I'll say about that is that there will be times when the judges go, holy crap, they did this for just $50,000. That's an amazing return on investment. So there is a small benefit to putting the budget in there if you can. There may also be times when the judges go, I can't believe that's the real budget. There must be more than that. Or I can't believe that big agency X will do a campaign for $50,000. But we don't require budget information. We are quite happy for budget information to be confidential, but some judges will find it helpful.
I wanted to make one more point about this one as well. It's clearly marked at the top. I mean, IKEA and is Hope and Glory is IKEA's lead agency. This is a partnership between IKEA and Shelter that Hope and Glory and Weber Shandwick were involved in brokering and bringing to life. And I think that one thing that judges really hate is when, in my experience, is when it looks like the agency did everything and there's no actual mention of the client team as well. And what I like about this one is it makes it very clear this wasn't just a team effort between one client and one agency. It was also a team effort between two agencies, the client and a not-for-profit charity partner as well. And it makes it really clear how everyone worked together to come up with a really impactful campaign. I think that's really key as well.
Look, our judges are all veteran public relations people, and they know that success is nearly always the result of collaboration. There is no shame in admitting that the idea came from the client, not the agency. There's no shame in saying that we partnered with an ad agency and these were the results that we got for the whole campaign. Sharing credit is actually much more impressive than claiming all of the results for yourself. And I will say, I always remember this. We got a SABRE entry years ago from an agency, and I'm exaggerating slightly, but only slightly. The opening paragraph was client X had completely screwed up their marketing, and then they hired us, and we made everybody love them. And believe me, every single client who judged that campaign got mad at the agency. Even if that's true, try not to make your client look like an idiot, because there are other clients on the panel and they're not going to appreciate it.
That also links to another point I wanted to make at some point this afternoon, which is that which was about client sign off, which I mentioned in terms of allowing yourself plenty of time. I once judged an awards scheme where the client and the agency had entered the same campaign completely separately, not mentioning the other. But the judges were judging both of them in the same category, obviously, and it didn't go down very well.
And one thing that is absolutely infuriating is when we publish the short list and then the agency calls up and says, our client saw they were shortlisted and they want you to take it down because they didn't give us permission.
Mm.
Please get permission in advance. Please make sure your client is on board. Please make sure that everybody knows that this is happening. Clients should be excited and proud to win, but they shouldn't be getting angry because you entered something without telling them.
No, absolutely not. Um, it's amazing the stuff we've seen. I wanted to just touch on briefly because I knew Paul and I would end up rabbiting on for hours, but just briefly on smart campaign and category selection. We've talked a little bit about the types of clients. I mean, obviously, it's got to be your best work. It doesn't really matter what type of client it is, what sector they're in, as long as you spell out in the context. And I'll talk a little bit about structuring or writing of your entry in a second. Um, do choose your best work. Obviously, it's tempting to just look at a campaign as a discrete piece of work, but it's perfectly possible to package up longer term stuff, particularly as we know when it comes to stuff like public affairs, stratcom, reputation management, longer things that are about behavioural change. As long as you can tell us the beginning, middle, and then, don't think that's been going on for 4 years, we can't enter it in the 2025 SABRE Awards. There's always a way of telling us what you've done up until that point, to make it clear to the judges that you've been doing something really successful. It's just been longer term. In terms of category selection, this is very much Paul's bag because he reviews the categories every year. There's a lot of them, Paul. How do you select which ones to go for?
Let me just for a moment talk about smart campaign and what that means. And you were talking about long-term work. That's very important. But also don't fall into the trap of thinking, oh, this campaign has won before. Sometimes it's won 2 or 3 times. We can't enter it again. Because while there are some judges who will say, well, what was new about the campaign this year compared to last year? There are also judges who know how hard it is to keep a sustained campaign going, to come back year after year doing a variation on the same theme. If the core idea is an award-winning idea and you're keeping it fresh and you're continuing to get results, you can win multiple sabres in multiple years for the same brilliant idea. Don't assume that because it's won before, the judges are bored with the idea or won't recognize it again. Sustained campaigns stand out. Now, on category selection, the most simple thing is that we do split our categories in North America into practice area and industry sector, and in Europe into geography, practice area, and industry sector. And you should take full advantage of that. If you have a campaign that you executed in France for a real estate company that was about business to business marketing, those are the free categories that you should enter in. The other thing that I wanted to say about categories that I think is less obvious is those categories that you think are inherently less creative are also those categories that are inherently less competitive. So there are some categories, I think, where we all think, well, this is where the creative work is. There's a lot of creative work in fashion and beauty. There's a lot of creative work in travel and leisure. There's a lot of creative work in influencer marketing. There's a lot of creative work in the automotive category. And that's true, and you should enter your creative work there. But if you're thinking to yourself, well, there isn't a lot of creative work in the extractive industries and mining, or there isn't a lot of creative work in professional service firms, or there isn't a lot of creative work in investor relations and capital markets. All of that is true, but it means that in those categories, you might be going up against 7 or 8 competitors instead of 60 or 70. And so if you have great work that you think was hugely effective in those categories, but isn't perhaps as obviously sexy as some of the work you did in fashion, or some of the work you did in food, or some of the work you did in healthcare, you should enter that work too, because your chances of winning will be increased by the fact that lots of people don't think that that's where the glamour is. Those less glamorous categories have a lot of good work in them and need more.
Okay, brilliant. Thanks, Paul. Really good point. All right, I want to dive into storytelling a bit because this is how I earned a living for 17 years, is getting this bit right. Whatever format you choose, you're going to have to tell a story with your entry. I think the key thing is to assume the judges know nothing. So even if you are working for an enormously big brand that you know inside out, don't assume anything. We're going to need a little bit of context. We're going to need this to set the scene for the story at the beginning. Like in that Hope and Glory and Weber Shandwick entry for IKEA, that hard-hitting first paragraph or two, that first 100 and 150 words, where you're setting the scene for the story. So who is the client? What are their challenges in the market? What business challenges and opportunities are they facing that they have brought you in to help them solve or progress? And just kind of setting the scene for why it matters, what your work here is for, and why it matters and who it matters to. So bring in as much as bring it to life, the judges, in terms of the kind of the human story behind it as well. Why does your work actually matter? What makes the campaign so exciting? When you're thinking about the story, I think it's very easy when you've been immersed in a campaign, and often when it comes to entry time, it's been completed some time ago and you started it maybe, months or even years before that. It's sometimes difficult to get that kind of umbrella view. So it's always worth kind of having a kind of a team discussion, or just chewing the fat with somebody within your team, saying, what were the headlines here? What did we do with it was so great? What was that original problem again? What was our brief? And really try and outline what the challenge was in the first place. Then we want to create a nice story arc throughout your campaign. So obviously we have a beginning and then we have the end, which is the results and the impact of your work. And in between, we want to spell out all the stuff that you talked about, the obstacles that you overcame. If there was a moment of peril, like we all know things go, slightly wrong, or things come up that weren't in the planning process. it's completely fine to admit a problem came up and how you resolved that problem as part of the process as well. That makes it much more real and resonant with the judges because they know they've all been through that. They know, you all know a campaign does not go smoothly from the planning stage to the results stage exactly as planned. So it's fine to bring in those challenges, those obstacles, to bring in the light bulb moments where you had your big creative idea. We want to see the data, we want to see the research, we want to see the analytics and the insights where they were there. We want to see the direct chain from the client problem to the insights to the big creative idea, then what you actually did. And as Paul said, that's the bit that used to be the core of traditional award entries, just a load of bullet points of activity. Keep that to a minimum. Don't bullet point everything. Make sure that you are avoiding flannel, waffle, marketing jargon. Tell it in simple, straightforward language that everyone will understand. And be very, very clear at the beginning what your objectives were. And they've got to be measurable objectives as well. We don't want to necessarily see raising awareness without some kind of qualifying phrases around that. We want to know what the problem was for the client, what their objective was in comms and in business terms and in wider societal terms, if that was an impact, like with that shelter campaign, there was a policy objective there as well. And then when we get to, so we want clear objectives, very, very clear objectives, and show you how you're going to be measuring them. At the end of that campaign, in the results section, where you're looking at impact, we want to see results and outcomes that match the stated objectives. Because so often we have a strong start in an award entry where it's like, well, this is a big problem. We've been brought in to solve it. This, we were charged with doing this. We had this great idea. Implementation was off the scale, and then it just falls off a cliff at the end because the results simply don't match the objectives. So you can't show that you did what you were tasked with doing. So it's really important that we have this kind of balanced story arc. So you have your beginning, you have your middle, and you have your end, and there's balance there as well. And it matches. Do not leave the judges with questions on their minds about, so what did you actually achieve? Did it actually make a difference? What have you got beyond media metrics? And I'll talk a little bit about and so will Paul, about the results, the kinds of results and outcomes and impacts, proof points that we like to see in a second. But the other thing I want to say about this, because I'm a writer, is watch your spelling and grammar, watch for typos, proof everything, even if you're doing something that's beautifully presented and much more visual than wordy. Do make sure that you've just approached it with some precision and discipline as well in the written part of the entry. So that, I mean, that's my top tip really for storytelling is tell the story, assume nothing, write it really well and in a compelling way. Make sure there's no holes in the story, and just really try and bring it to life through the written word. We haven't really experimented yet, and I'm sure this is happening all over the place, with use of AI, generative AI, to produce award entries. I don't think there's any doubt it will give you a head start in coming up with the first draft, but don't think that our judges aren't going to be able to start stuff that is straight from ChatGPT without your own personal experience of the campaign.
Let me just add a couple of things on storytelling. So the first thing that I'll say is, you know, if you read any of the major texts on storytelling, the same thing is true in all of them. I'm thinking of this idea of the hero's journey.
Yeah.
And you want to take the judges on that journey. They need to understand the purpose that the hero, which is either you or the brand, preferably the brand, embarked upon. They need to understand the obstacles that were in your way. They need to understand the challenges that you overcome. And then they need to understand the ultimate triumph. And those principles of storytelling are the same whether you're writing a novel or whether you're writing an awards entry. The only difference is that the awards entry hopefully is a little shorter. The other thing that I always say to people, and I still believe this is the best advice possible in terms of crafting your story, is We talked at the beginning of this about the fact that even your mom and dad don't really understand what public relations is or what public relations people do. Imagine that you're home for Christmas or Thanksgiving or Diwali or whatever you celebrate, and you're trying to explain to your mom and dad why what you do matters, why it's exciting, why it's intellectually stimulating, and why it's important. And tell the judges the story as if you were telling the story to your mom and dad and trying to convince them that what you do is great. Because
Absolutely.
that enthusiasm, that excitement will jump off the page.
I think there's something about care there as well, isn't there? I mean, passion and excitement are very overused words in our industry, but I think if you can show you really cared about this work and you really cared that it made a difference, that shines through in an award entry. You can always tell when somebody's kind of going through the motions of we've got to enter an award and here's a few hundred words on what we did. Like if you're passionate about the work you're doing for your client and you really care that you've helped them achieve success, do try and get that across. As Paul said, it is like telling your mum and dad at Christmas why what you do matters and why anyone should care about it.
We probably need to step on the accelerator a little bit, Maya.
We've talked quite. I've talked about objectives and results. Paul, just give. Can you give our viewers a bit more of an idea of the kinds of results metrics judges love to see?
Let me start with the objectives, because obviously if your objectives are fuzzy, your results are going to be fuzzy too. The clearer the objective, the more defined the objective, the better. Things like the client hired us to build buzz for their new product is not particularly helpful, even if it's true. Questions like build buzz among what kind of audience? Every single person in the country, market, region? Probably not, right? Who was your target audience? Who did they really care about? What were the key messages that they wanted to deliver? What were the key results, the behaviors that they wanted to incentivize? If the objective was to sell more, that's great. If the objective was to pass a piece of legislation or defeat a piece of legislation, great. If the objective was to gain community support or public support for an issue or cause, great. If the objective was to raise brand love, great. But be as precise as possible about your objectives. And then, as Maja said, make sure that your results are correlated to your objectives. If your objective was to raise awareness, show me that you raised awareness. If your result was to drive sales, tell me something about the sales result. If your objective was to get a piece of legislation passed, tell me where you are in that process, if that legislation has been passed or if attitudes have changed. There's a sliding scale of results that sort of starts at the very bottom level with we got this much media coverage. Sometimes our judges will look at that and they will make the leap to that probably ended up with a good result. But usually we got a ton of media coverage is not enough. After media coverage comes engagement. So not only did we get a lot of people to read this, but we got a lot of people to share it. We got a lot of people to talk about it. Then comes we changed attitudes. People were more favorable about our brand, our product. They indicated a greater intent to buy the product, that kind of thing. And then comes behavior, which is we sold more stuff, we made more money, we changed people's votes, we got people to sign our petition, all of those things. The more you can demonstrate action rather than just the coverage as a result of what you did, the better chance you will have of getting the judges excited.
And what do we hate, Paul?
What do we hate? Okay, we really, so this is difficult, right? We really dislike AVEs.
Yeah, we hate
Um,
AVs.
but at the same time, we
Clients like them though.
understand we understand that in emerging markets, clients love AVE, and clients will continue to insist on AVE. If you look at other awards competitions such as Cannes, you will see AVE quoted all the time as a metric in winning campaigns. You will not be disqualified because you quote only AVE, but we will want ideally more than that. We will want some indication of what the impact of that was on the target audience.
Mm.
Did they change their minds? Did they change their behaviors? Did they buy your stuff?
I think it's worth signposting everyone to the AMEC measurement framework on this as well, because the difference between outputs and outcomes and then impact in the real world is really clearly laid out in that framework. So that's worth having a look at the planning stage, not just the putting an award entry stage together. Supporting materials, just very briefly, we like to see some visual stuff. So if there's no pictures in your entry, attach a couple of pictures. We definitely don't want a 600-page cutting book. We don't necessarily need to see analysis files and dashboards and decks. The judges don't have time to look at the in depth at your proof points. They just want a sense of bringing it to life visually, I think. The 2-minute can style video, I love them personally. Other judges don't like them. It's completely up to you. That's optional. If you've got one hanging about, chuck it on as a bit of supporting material. We'd love to see it.
Yeah, I'll be honest with you. I am so old that when we started doing this, people would send VHS tapes
Oh, wow.
of their work. And I would say that maybe 1 in 10 got looked at by the judges. Today, when it's a click away, I'm the only judge who prefers reading to watching video. If you want to send in an accompanying video, I will say that most judges will look at it today, and some of them will look at it first before they look at your summary. Judges have gotten much more comfortable with video. It is by no means essential, but it can be helpful. And if you can do it easily, I would recommend including a video, a highlights reel, a sizzle reel. It doesn't have to be something that you shot specifically to explain the campaign. The summary will do that, but a highlights reel will catch the judge's attention.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Paul. In summary, tell a story. Don't give us loads of bullet points. Don't ignore the client's role and do get sign off. Give us a nice hard-hitting first paragraph. Remember, the judges are reviewing a lot of entries, dozens across the categories they're looking at. Make life easy for them. Remember to directly connect your objectives with your results. Include solid measurement and evaluation and every bit of data you've got, even if you have to go back to the client and say, if you've got anything that they haven't yet shared with you, that they hadn't even thought of feeding back to you as an agency as proof points, and double check your typos and grammar.
The only thing I'll say about that last point is sure, but we understand that a lot of people who enter the SABREs have English as a second language.
Absolutely.
And nobody is going to punish you because, you're from Romania and you're not as fluent in English as people from America and the UK. That warning that I said I gave to the judges at the beginning, judge the work, not the entry, can apply to that. Don't obsess about whether you have perfect English. Our judges are smart enough. Many of them have English as a second language. our judges are smart enough to see past the occasional grammatical error to the quality of the work.
Absolutely.
On the other hand, if you're Weber Shandwick in New York, you
Yeah,
probably need to get the spelling right.
you probably need to go. Uh, Paul, do you want to just whip us through quickly how the judging process works, how we come up with the winners for our SABRE Awards?
Sure, we typically have 4 or 5 people plus me on every judging panel. We try to make sure that there's a balance of client and agency judges on each panel. We give our judges 3 to 4 weeks to read all the entries, to click on all the videos, to think about what they liked and didn't like. Then we get them together on a Zoom panel. We ask each of them to give us their favorites, usually 3 to 5 favorites in a category. That will create a short list. It can sometimes be 5 because everybody agrees. It can sometimes be 12 because nobody agrees. And then we'll discuss those favorites with the objective of picking a winner. Everybody will look at everybody else's favorites and explain why they didn't like them. We'll debate, we'll discuss. It's usually very civilized. And we end up with a consensus or a vote where the majority wins. I tend to be there simply to take notes and make sure that that everything is recorded. I will occasionally voice an opinion, but for the most part, the judges are in charge. And they all bring their own different ideas about what makes a great campaign. So some judges love big, bold, creative ideas, and some judges love great strategic insight, and some judges don't care about anything but results. That tends to make for lively discussion, but at the end of the day, you would, I think, be surprised at how much agreement there is about great work, because great work typically does all of those things. It has a terrific insight, it has a big, bold, creative idea, and that's why it works. And the judging process brings all of that together into one discussion.
Yeah, it's always absolutely fascinating and a real privilege to kind of hear the kind of thought processes of such a mix and diverse panel that we often have. And
And our judges, I mean, our judges work phenomenally hard,
they do.
right? They read every word, they look at every video they can, they check the supporting materials. Sometimes they do their own research. I've had judges come to me and say, I looked online and found out this about this campaign, even though it wasn't in the entry. They really care about making sure that the best work gets recognized. And honestly, they do all that for no real reward, except, they might steal an idea or two. But honestly, our judges are terrific. And huge respect to our judges.
Yeah, absolutely. I've got loads of comments from what our judges say, but we're running over time, so I'm going to make sure that everyone who's signed up to this gets a copy of the deck and notes, as I said, and probably Q&A. In a nutshell, do enter your best work, even if it's in, as Paul said, a deeply unsexy or unglamorous category. You've got a better chance of winning, frankly. Pick the right campaigns, pick the right categories, think about how you want to present it, tell your story beautifully. Outcomes and objectives need to match. Meet the deadlines, please. Don't ask for an extension the day before. Get client sign off and make the judges' lives as easy as you can, so it just sings out to them that you should be a winner. Have we got time for Q&A?
We don't really.
Okay.
What I will say is that we will be sending a copy of this presentation. We'll be posting it to the website. It'll be on the Sabre Entry website and the PRovoke Media website via YouTube. We'll send a follow-up email to everybody who was here. And if you have any questions based on the presentation today or anything we didn't cover, please send us an email. We'll do our best to get back to you as quickly as possible. And then we'll include whatever you had questions about in our next webinar and presentation, because we're really pleased with the success of this one. Thank you so much for tuning in, and enjoy the rest of your day or the rest of your evening, depending on where you are in the world. Thank you, Maja.
Thanks, Paul. That was brilliant.
Thanks.